Hello everyone, it's Silvia from Fiddler Tarot. Welcome to my channel and welcome to the Summerween Challenge. So as many of you will know, Summerween is officially an annual holiday which is celebrated, originally started to be celebrated in Oregon, in Gravity Falls, and technically it's celebrated in and around June the 22nd or the second to last Friday of the month. And it is celebrated originally because the residents of Gravity Falls loved Halloween so much that they didn't want to wait for the end of October to celebrate it, and they wanted to celebrate something throughout the summer months as well. However, after that, it had kind of expanded into a holiday that many of us have come to know and love. I have to say that personally, during Summerween, which for me is more around the first week of July, I actually make it a point to read as many horror books as possible and watch as many horror movies as possible, because it's kind of a tradition that we always hold during the last week of October, but it kind of makes sense to do that twice a year, especially if you really, really love Halloween as much as I do. And so I thought that since there's a lot of booktubers around that do the Summerween challenge, I thought why not implement the Summerween challenge for TarotTuber as well. So I have a number of prompts, exactly 10, and we're going to have a look at how I respond to these prompts with choosing one tarot or oracle decks. I will write all of the prompts below in the description box, and you're more than welcome to join me in this challenge. So the first prompt is a creature feature deck. So if you're not familiar with the term creature feature, is a horror trope. So think about all of the movies or the books that you read or the movies you watched that had a creature, all of those creatures that go bump in the night. And basically I'm thinking about practically every single one of the episodes of the TV show Supernatural. So if you're not familiar with the show, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. It went on for 15 seasons, and it's the story of Sam and Dean Winchester. And these two brothers, they literally go hunting. They actually call themselves hunters, but they hunt something very special. So they go hunting for creatures that are supernatural, and as such, they are, obviously in the TV show, those creatures are not just supernatural, but they're also evil. And so let's say that they have a reason behind it. I'm not going to spoil it for you. Obviously, if you haven't watched the show, you will see that they have a very strong, powerful motivation to do so, but it's absolutely fantastic. And I have to say, there's also a lot of humor, which is something that I very much appreciate in these kind of TV shows or books or movies, because I believe that we kind of need to participate in the fear that is triggered by those really terrifying scenes, but we also need to temper that sometimes with a bit of humor. So creature feature, as we said, it's obviously one of those creatures that go hump in the night, and it's something that really scares us, but at the same time is something that really fascinates us. And as such, I have chosen this deck. So this is the Tarocchi Yokai. So this is the Italian version. I think that this deck has been published also in a French version. And yokai is referring to the name that is given to supernatural beings in the Japanese tradition. And so there's a number of decks that cover this. There's the Yokai Yochi, which I have, which is a fantastic tarot deck, but it's an indie deck. It's now out of print and hard to find, but it's really, really beautiful. And then there's another few decks that cover this theme, one of which is this one, the Tarocchi Yokai, by Marianna Zanetta and Matthew Meyer. And by the way, there's also another Tarocchi Yokai or Yokai Tarot that will be published by Lo Scarabeo probably around October. And it's completely new. It looks absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend it. It's literally called Yokai Tarot. If you want to Google it, you will see Yokai Tarot Lo Scarabeo. It probably will yield the right result. So let's have a look at this deck. It's very exciting. It is the typical creature feature deck because there's a lot of creatures, supernatural creatures in these cards. And as I was saying before, it's something that really scares you, but at the same time, it fascinates you, and it's the kind of motivation why there's a lot of us that really love the horror genre, because on the one hand, we want to check if we would be able to confront ourselves with something that really scares us, but at the same time, it creates this kind of morbid fascination with something really dark and possibly dangerous. And this is an absolute joy of a deck. I have to say, I really love it. I love the fact that, contrary to the Yokai Yochitaro, is actually in full color. And I love the images on these cards. There's a really interesting guidebook that goes with it, and you can read about all of these creatures and yokai, so supernatural beings that are presented in the cards. And I have to say that when it comes to the representation of the cards themselves, as in the meaning, the tarot meaning of the cards, when you look at the associations of the yokai, so the supernatural beings, they are actually spot on. I really, really like it. So this one is, for example, number 2 in the Major Arcana. So this is the High Priestess, La Papessa in Italian. And this is the Kitsune. So the Kitsune is the yokai that has the shape of a fox, as you can see. But it is a supernatural being, and in many cases it's very scary. They exist in a realm that is almost parallel to our own world, and it exists within our own world, but it's almost as if they had their own life. They have their own ceremonies. They have their own weddings, for example. It is said that when there's a summer storm, for example, it is because there is a kitsune wedding that is taking place, and the foxes make it so that there is a summer storm so as to keep the humans away, because they don't want humans to disturb their wedding. So there is, behind each and every one of these cards, there is a very interesting, scary, but also fascinating story. And that's one of the reasons why I really love this deck and all of the other decks that are in the theme of the yokai, because these are not just presented as the creature feature kind of decks, but they're also telling you these really amazing stories that compose what in Japanese is called the Hyaku Monogatari Kaidan Kaides, which is the night of 100 ghost stories, where you're supposed to tell a really scary story, and then you have 100 candles lit up, and then for each and every story that you tell, you extinguish one candle at a time, and obviously because it's held at night, at the end it will be completely dark. And then there's something else included in the story that I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't watched any movies or read any stories about that event, but it's actually really fascinating. So this is the creature feature deck. And the next prompt is the slasher deck. So again, we're looking at a very well-known horror trope, so the slasher movie. And you can think about any kind of movie where there's a lot of blood and gore and possibly intestine spilled on the floor. And, you know, there's always someone who's most likely a supernatural being, but it used to be a human, and then something really horrible happened to them and they became evil, and they want to take a revenge on pretty much anyone that is innocent, or perhaps they're not innocent, they have something to do with something that happened to the slasher, but at the end of the day, the revenge is had, unless you find another horror trope, which is the final girl, which is ironically a girl that looks completely innocent and more likely than not very strong, not very powerful, doesn't really look like she will be withstanding all of the deaths and gore and blood and entrails on the floor, but she will be the last one, and that's usually the one that actually defeats the monster or the slasher. There's a lot of movies that have this trope, and I'm thinking about The Cabin in the Woods. That is really ironic because it kind of is almost as if the author, so it comes from a book, it's by Paul Tremblay. I don't think the title was exactly the same as the movie, but it literally shows you how there is this kind of very almost winking kind of action taking place in which the author refers back to the orotropes and it kind of defeats them throughout the movie. So when looking at the deck, I thought about a slasher deck with that sense of let's say a defeating purpose at the same time as the slasher theme. And I thought about the Mio Eames Tarot. So this is an incredibly beautiful deck for many, many reasons. So the reason why I picked this is not just because it reminds me of the slasher theme, but it's also because I really like to talk about this deck. It's probably one of my favorites. So it's an indie deck. I don't think it's out of print. I think it's still available. It doesn't really come with a booklet. It only gives you this kind of fold out instruction. And as you can tell, the instructions are in Korean. So it doesn't really tell you much, but it is one of those tarot decks that you can read even without a guidebook. It is highly symbolic. It's a very beautiful deck. The color palette is very muted, as you can see, not more than 1 or 2 colors. There is a lot of blood. There's a lot of gore, as you can see. The typical slasher kind of trope, you can see it practically in each and every card. As in here, for example, the Queen of Swords is someone holding a decapitated head by their hair, and you can see here that there is a what looks like a dagger, through the neck of this one's person, this person that used to be alive. And this is a really intense, as you can imagine, really, really intense kind of deck. I absolutely love it. There's a couple of reasons why I've loved this deck so much. One of the reasons is because it is very dark. I kind of appreciate the darkness in a deck, especially when it's a communicative kind of darkness. It's very eloquent. It's very symbolic. But it's also because it really shows you the cards and the meaning of the cards from a different perspective. And if you watched my channel for any length of time, I always repeat this. I absolutely love a deck when it gives me an additional layer of interpretation to the cards. Because after reading and collecting for so many years, I always like it when someone gives me their own point of view and their own opinion on how we should read the cards. You will have probably noticed by now that some of the peeps, the minors are rather peepish. And when we look at the majors, they are fully cynic, but at the same time, they don't have a lot of elements. So it is kind of a minimalist kind of deck, but I really do appreciate it because even with not too many symbols, it is still very, very powerful. And I have to say, I remember talking about this deck a number of times in reference to the Lovers card. And the reason why I use this deck for the Lovers card is because, and obviously now I'm struggling to find the Lovers card. There you go. So this is the Lovers card. And as you can see, the scene is quite clear. It's not difficult to understand what's going on here. So you see 2 hands, but there's something very different between these 2. So one is a skeleton hand. And so we imagine that this person is not alive anymore. Whereas this hand seems to be, or we can imagine that this hand belongs to a person that is still alive. And yet these 2 are still linked. They are bound one to the other because there is this string that attaches to these 2 fingers. And so this card is asking me to acknowledge that there is a choice. So there's still the element of choice that is portrayed by the Lovers card in the tarot, but it's portraying the choice of believing in the bond that goes beyond death. I absolutely love the way in which the Lovers card is portrayed here. And further on, there's also another card that I absolutely love, and it's the 3 of Cups. And as always, I'm trying to find it. Okay, so of course it was the last one. So the 3 of Cups, as you can see here, the way I like to read this card is that there is this sense of blessing from the person that was probably alive, and now he is no longer alive. And we can see it here from the skeleton hand, and I like to think that it's the same skeleton hand that was portrayed in the Lovis card. But in this case, it's actually supporting these two hands that belong to two persons that we can assume that they're still alive. And so it's almost as if they were saying that is this sense of blessing, this sense of saying, I bless your union, even from beyond the grave, from beyond life. I give my blessing because love is going beyond the limit of death. And it's a really powerful way to read this card because I still read numerologically. And so number 3 is always referring to the growth. And when it's within the suit of cups, which is the suit of the alchemical element of water, we always refer back to the feelings and the emotions. And there is this sense of growing in the feelings, so the emotions of these people. They are bound not just to life, but they're bound after life as well. And I think it's absolutely amazing. But because of all the gore and, all of the organs that we see in many of these cards, I thought it was a fantastic pick for the slasher prompt. So the next prompt is a haunted deck. So you will know this horror trope because it's very famous. There are so many haunted houses books out there and haunted houses movies. And even when you go to a Luna Park, so an amusement park, there's always like a haunted house attraction or exhibition. And the concept of the haunted house is very famous and is very old and ancient, I would say, as well. So as always, there is that sense of looking from outside, being a protagonist of this haunted horror story, but also looking at it from outside, because we become viewers when we read a book or when we watch a movie. And we kind of know where this is going. And there is that request of suspension of disbelief when we want to enjoy a book or we want to enjoy a movie, because we know what's going to happen. We know that that house that we inherited from that long lost relative of ours, we didn't even remember it existed, is a haunted house. And we know what's going to happen. And we know that no matter what we do, we are going to be confronted with that really powerful force, supernatural entity that is haunting the house. And yet we still fall for it because we still want to proceed. And we know that we are protagonists in this story and we know what we need to do. So I wanted to show you this deck, which is the Magician's Martyrs and Madman Tarot by Travis McHenry. This was originally an indie deck. I think it was a Kickstarter deck. And then it was picked up by Rockpool and it was released mass market. And I have to say, Rockpool lately is doing a fantastic job when it comes to both tarot and oracle decks. This one was from, I don't remember what it was, earlier 2024 or late 2023. I honestly think that it was back from 2023, but I could be wrong. But in any case, it is a fantastic deck. I love it so much because what happens is that the images are curated art and they're actually referring to a lot of characters that some of them are actually, they have actually existed in history. Some of them are representation of myths and lore, like for example, the Livonian werewolf. But many of them are historical characters, and it's very interesting to read about them in the guidebook. So the guidebook is exceptionally good. It would tell you what the story is behind these characters, and more often than not, you will see that there's something very common throughout all of these characters. They always refer to a haunted past. Something happened in their life that really made them stand out amongst all the others. We have Rasputin, for example, Nostradamus, for example, Jack the Ripper. So we know, many of those characters are very easily recognizable. Some others are not. It depends on how well you know your history. There's also Count Vlad, for example, Vlad Dracula. And it's always very interesting, but there's also Harry Houdini, for example. So there's also that sense of haunting, that sense of being doomed. That's what I wanted to say. There's a sense of doom when you look at these cards, and it's absolutely fantastic. At least for me, I really, really enjoy reading about some of these stories, even though, as you can imagine, many of them are actually really sad or scary. But they do, all of them, they have this sense of haunting that is a very common theme, I would say, to all of these stories. I really love this deck. Ironically, it's not one of those decks that I use, let's say, for client readings or even readings for myself. I actually don't, if someone asks for this deck, I gladly pick it up and use it, but I always make sure that they know what the theme or also the vibe of the deck are, because as you can imagine, it is very confronting at time, but I absolutely love it, and it's my choice for the prompt, a haunted deck. And now we've come to a number of prompts which are not necessarily a horror trope per se, but they are elements or symbols of horror movies or books. And pretty much are also symbols of Halloween and Summerween, like in this case. So the next prompt is a deck with a raven. Now, it could be a raven as in, there could be the name Raven in the title, there could be the raven in the box, there could be a raven in one of the cards, it could be also in the back of the cards, it doesn't matter, but it needs to have a raven. And by raven, I also mean crow. So I had to go with Corrado Roy's Murder of Crows Tarot, which is one of my favorite decks. This one has been published by Los Carabeo. If you have watched, again, my channel, you will know how much I love Corrado Roy, because he's one of my favorite illustrators. I have loved and admired his work ever since I was little, because Corrado Roy is actually one of the illustrators of one of my favorite horror graphic novels of all times, which is Dylan Dog. It's an Italian graphic novel which is still published to this day. So every time I go to Italy, I buy the monthly issue of Dylan Dog, and they call it the investigator of nightmares. So he's basically very similar to a Sam D. Winchester in the sense that he's also chasing or hunting supernatural beings or creatures that go bump in the night. But going back to this deck, because I feel like I'm talking too much about Dylan Dog. So Corrado Roy was an illustrator of some of the issues of Dylan Dog, but when I heard that he actually created, illustrated, and came out with The Murder of Crows, as in a whole tarot deck with his art style, I immediately just reached out and bought a copy. And I have to say, I was not disappointed. This deck is incredibly dark, it's very scary. Each and every one of these cards has got an unsettling kind of vibe or energy to it. Even when we're talking about positive, generally speaking, positive cards, we're still feeling like we need to look over our shoulders because we feel like someone is watching us. There is that element of dread that is so very exciting and fascinating, and it's something that really pushes us to watch that horror movie or to read the horror book. I really love this deck. Again, it's not one of those decks that I use for divination because it is a very dark deck. However, it's one of those decks that I absolutely love, and it's very, very safe in my collection because of the art style and what it means for me. So this is definitely my pick for a deck that has a raven in it. And the next prompt is a deck with a ghost in it. And I had to pick the Ghosts and Spirit Tarot by Lisa Hunt. This is an older deck published by US Games. I feel like there might not have been reprints of this deck, even though I think it's still available. It is a mass market deck, and generally speaking, mass market decks, especially by US Games, very rarely go out of print. Some of them do, unfortunately, but I don't think it's difficult to find it. Now, if you don't know this deck is absolutely fantastic. Every single one of these cards actually tells a story, and it's always a story that is related to ghosts or spirits. So it is very much in theme, and I believe that it's one of the best decks that you might want to use when you go, for example, do readings for a Halloween party, a Summerween party, and something like that, because it's just just really amazing. And the art style, the artwork by Lisa Hunt is fantastic. I believe that her particular art style really marries the genre very, very well. I can see that she's made other decks as well. In particular, I'm thinking about the Pastoral Tarot, which is very light and has the vibe of a summer breeze, for example, or spring even. So totally the opposite of these kind of vibes. But somehow I feel that these cards and the theme that is conveyed by the story behind these cards is actually a lot better. It goes well with her art style, or at least she's done an incredible job in painting these stories. They are very scary cards, and I can assure you that when you read the stories behind the images on the cards, you will feel that they are very scary stories as well. I really love this, and this is my pick for a deck with the ghost in it. So the next prompt is a deck with a skull in it. So now a skull is always been a symbol for the dead, obviously. It is almost as if it were confronting to us, because there is a certain sense of finality to a skull. And yet it's amazing because there's a number of books, horror books, like I'm thinking about the Dresden File, for example, where there is always someone talking with a skull, and the skull actually answers back. And more often than not, the trope of the talking skull represents a spirit that is sometimes even whimsical and funny, like indeed in the Dresden Files. I don't know if you read them, but it's a number of books. I think it's 6 or 7 books. And there is a wizard in Chicago, and he has to deal with a lot of, other creatures. There's wendigos, there's werewolves, there's vampires, there's zombies, etc. And it's, again, it reminds me a lot of Supernatural, the TV show, but it's in book form. It's really, really engaging. I love it. And it does have this relationship with a talking skull. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but I absolutely love skulls. So I'm literally surrounded by them. There's this one here, hello, which I really love. It's got a skull and a raven on top. There's also my Jerry. So I talk about Jerry a lot because it's an absolutely beautiful piece of marble that has been chiseled, and then there was this crack in the middle of the top of the head, as you can see, that has been filled in some kind of a variation of the kintsugi method. So instead of using just gold paste to repair the crack, the artist has actually put a lot of semi-precious gemstones in here. So this is really lovely. And then of course I've got my spells, and this is really, really gorgeous because it's got a couple of books of spells, and it's got this skull which is kind of pensive and thinking about what's going on or what is the best spell to use in certain situation. And then because I have Jerry, I also have my Larry, which is this one here, which is a candle, and I really like it. It's absolutely gorgeous. So I have a number of skulls. At the beginning I was just buying like amethyst skulls, or in any case crystal skulls, but then I decided that I wanted to branch out, because you can find, especially under Halloween, you can find a lot of shops that sell skull themed decoration, and I just absolutely love it. So when it comes to a tarot deck or an oracle deck that has a skull in it, I immediately thought about this one. So this is an oracle deck, and it's called the Oracle of the Witch by Flavia Kate Peters and Barbara Michael John Free, but the illustrations are by Mira Nurdianti, and I actually met Myra, sorry, because she went to the Oddities and Curiosities Expo in Sydney last December, and I went there, I met with her, and she's absolutely lovely. She made these illustrations, and she made an e-zine as well, which I bought, and a number of stickers that she was selling. I bought a number of them as well. And I really, really love her art style. So this is pretty much what I consider the Halloween deck, you know, the most Halloweeny kind of decks of all. I have thought of this one for the skull because many of the cards have a skull. There's one trope that I absolutely love, and I don't know if you can see it here, and is the incorporation of the skull into the face of the moon. So in many cases, there is the anthropomorphization of the moon as if it were a face, but not in many cases you will see the moon with the face of a skull. So I thought it was very interesting as a concept, very fascinating, and I wanted to dig deeper into the meaning of that. So I really find this deck, other than the fact that it's got, you know, all of these skulls, but it's a very, very beautiful deck per se. It does have keywords, even though I have to say they're not. Okay, so they're here. There's a title, for example, Hecate or Hecate in this case, but there's also a keyword here, and I'm not entirely sure you can see it because unfortunately the publisher decided to choose the color red, which is in theme with basically the color of the deck in general, but red on black, it's not very visible. And so that's the only problem that I have with this deck, which is not a deal breaker. Look at this skull on the moon, how absolutely gorgeous it is. But I have to say, I actually struggle sometimes to read, not the title, but indeed the keywords, which are at the bottom. And I am someone that sometimes for a deck, I really need to read the keyword unless I know, or I can talk about the card by looking at the images, but I always do prefer. It's also because it really tells me the opinion of the creator, the writers, and what they thought about when they were writing or, you know, thinking about this card and what the keywords were. But in any case, I absolutely love this deck. And when I thought about a deck that would really give me the right answer for the prompt, a deck with a skull in it, I thought about this one. So the Oracle of the Witch. And the next prompt is a deck with a pumpkin. And now I know that a pumpkin is obviously something you will find only for Halloween because it is the right season for pumpkins. But on the other hand, I believe that nowadays we can consider a pumpkin to be a decoration rather than the actual fruit or veggie. Please excuse me, I actually don't even know whether a pumpkin is a fruit or a vegetable. So I will be excused. I'm not the botanical person in the family. My husband is. I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. I like them. I enjoy them. I like them as a food. I also like to have them in my decorations when Halloween comes, but when it comes to determining what the provenance is, I actually don't know that. My apologies for that. In any case, I thought about many decks that I've got, and there's obviously Oracle decks with pumpkins as well, but I thought about one in specific, and I really like it, and it's this one here. It's the Cozy Witch Tarot deck. This is also a mass market deck. It's by Amanda Lovelace. It came out by the end of last year. And I remember that ironically, it was one of the decks I splurged on when it was it Black Friday? I think it was Black Friday. It was sold on Amazon for a ridiculously low price, like literally the price of a sandwich in Sydney. And so I was like, instead of buying a sandwich, I will make myself a sandwich and then I will buy this deck. And when I saw this card, I really loved it. And I have to say, of course, it says Blessed Samhain Witches, which I really like. But it's also because it's the 10 of Wands. And I love the fact that it's this person that is carrying all of these candles. And obviously they're struggling, but they still have to go on. And, you know, they're going to this party. We assume they're going to a Halloween party. But they're carrying this and they're like, okay, I can make it, but it's really tough. I love the fact that it says Samhain as well, because as you know, I live in Australia, which is in the southern hemisphere. And so our Samhain is at the opposite, obviously, we have the opposite season as you guys in the northern hemisphere. So our Samhain is during our winter, which it starts in June and it ends at the end of August. Whereas, of course, for you, Samhain is on the 31st of October. So for us, it's just really hot in Australia. 31st of October is really hot, so you will not have pumpkins, even though in some cases, obviously, they can grow them. So for me, it's actually the right time to look at pumpkins. We have them when you go to a supermarket. You can find them anywhere right now. And I really like to be reminded of the fact that Summerween and Halloween are kind of, you know, putting us in the same kind of time of the year when it comes to the vibes and the energies. And it's the one thing that feels similar when I'm in Australia, because Summerween is, let's say, our version of Halloween that is celebrated at the same time in the Northern Hemisphere as well. It was a long explanation. I don't even know if I made my point, but I wanted to say that it is really tough to live in the Southern Hemisphere when you love Halloween, because it doesn't give you the same vibes. And so if we can celebrate Halloween and calling it Summerween, I'm all for it. So this deck is really, really amazing. I have to say that it surprised me a lot, because at the beginning, when I was looking at walkthrough of this deck, I was thinking that it's too young, the protagonists are too young. I will not resonate with the cards because I do not see myself in these people. But then, as I said, it was the cost of a sandwich in Sydney, and then I thought to myself, let's just give it a go and see if it works for me. And lo and behold, it actually does. It's an amazing deck. It reads really, and I mean really, really well. What I find fantastic is that there is, for each and every card, as you can see, there's not just obviously the images and the title, but there's also a message at the bottom. And I have to say, these messages are very, very deep. I really love them. At the same time, also, I was looking for an oracle deck that will pair up well with this deck, and I found that the Magical Spirit Oracle, also published by Rockpool, I believe, pairs up really, really well with this tarot deck. And it is, there is this sense of magic, but also witchy, and I just really love those two together. There's a lot of orange tones in this deck as well, which, you know, it justifies in a way the reason why I picked this for the prompt, a deck with a pumpkin in it. And as you can see, there's more than one card with a pumpkin in there. So absolutely love this deck, the Cozy Witch Tarot deck. The next prompt is a deck you like to use at dusk. Now, I wanted to switch off all the lights, but the problem is that obviously I would not have had enough light to film. So unfortunately, I have to keep them on. But I don't know if you noticed, but these ones here, I'm just going to try and show you. So these ones here, these lights are small pumpkins. I don't know if you can see. So I thought it was really cute and very atmospheric. So a deck that I like to use at dusk is the Darkness of Light Tarot, which is, I don't know whether it comes as a contradiction in terms. Maybe it does. There is something to this deck that I really like and appreciate. This one, I have to say, though, that it's a very special edition, because this is the edition with the white borders. And so it's the third edition with the white borders. And if you have this deck, and if you have the other edition, the one that everyone is familiar with, which has the black borders, you will probably feel like there's something different about the cards. There's something different about the tone of the images, probably also the colors. And this is definitely because of the white borders. So the white borders actually give a different frame, a different light to the cards themselves. And because this deck is called indeed the Darkness of Light, that incorporates the two elements of darkness and light in the same title, it kind of made sense for me to actually reach out and look for this deck rather than the one with the black borders. I have to say, I'm very happy that I found it, because it's not the one that has been reprinted. I think there's only one print of this deck in this version. And as I said, I was very lucky to find it. The titles, I have to say, the titles of the majors are in Italian. And I don't really understand why the titles of the majors are in Italian, but then the titles on the minors are in English. It feels like it's a bit odd. But it doesn't matter. I mean, I can obviously be in Italian, I can read Italian, so that's absolutely not a problem for me. I have to kind of switch between the two, which is more funny than anything else. I have to say, the images are just amazing. I mean, look at this Five of Wands. Isn't it absolutely gorgeous? And it really does give me that sense of darkness and light at the same time. And I can assure you, if you read at dusk, maybe with a couple of candles for light, I can assure you that it is an incredibly amazing experience. Really amazing. there is one thing that I want to ask you, because I used to have the first edition of this deck, and I remember that the strength card said forte. So I always thought, okay, that's a mistake, obviously, because the word forte means strong in Italian, and it's an adjective, it's not a noun. But I see now that it's called La Forza, which is strength, which is correct. So if I don't know whether I dreamed about that or not. If you have the first edition, could you please let me know in the comments below if it's indeed it says La Forza or it says Forte, because I don't know whether I dreamt about it or I was actually remembering something. But that's just a detail. In any case, as I said, try, if you have this deck, try and read with it at dusk with a couple of candles, light it up, because it is an amazing experience. So this is my pick for a deck that you like to use at dusk. And the next prompt is a deck with darker colors. Now, there's a number of decks that are black and white, but for some reason, maybe it depends on the amount of white as opposed to the amount of black in the cards themselves, but they don't feel like dark decks. I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but I wanted this prompt to point to a deck that is not just using perhaps darker colors than others, but it also does give you darker vibes. And I had to go with this deck, which is, by the way, absolutely beautiful. It's called the Hyde Tarot, created by Dan Francis. It's an independently produced deck. I absolutely love the concept behind this deck, which is a bit of a voyeuristic kind of concept, because the Hyde Tarot refers to the fact that when you are watching birds in nature, so you're a birder or a bird watcher as it used to be called, you more often than not, you can find a few huts that are camouflaged in the wild, and if you hide yourself in these huts, then there's a kind of event you can put your camera lens in, and you can actually take photos of wildlife undisturbed. And that is a very interesting concept, because at the same time, the theme of the voyeurism is very common to a lot of horror movies and a lot of horror books. And I thought that was the perfect pick, because the Hyde Tarot, it reminds me of technically it's supposed to show you nature as in caught off guard, as in, what will happen when you hide yourself and you see an animal and they don't perceive your presence, and so they behave as if you were not there. But at the same time, it gives me that kind of creepy vibes because it is kind of creepy to be hiding behind or inside these huts, which are camouflaged. And it also, when it comes to the colors, as you will notice, of course, there's a lot of darker colors, so black and white, but there's a lot of grays as well. Generally speaking, I would say the vibes of this deck are kind of dark. Now, when you zoom in, for example, this image, I know that it's a matter of, I don't know if you're familiar with the image of a duck that so it's either a duck or a rabbit. If you look in a certain way, it looks like a rabbit. If you maybe turn the page if you tilt it a bit, you will see a rabbit, or you will just move from duck to rabbit, back to duck, back to rabbit, all over again. So that concept is very interesting, because it really plays trick on your brain, and it depends on how the brain perceives the image, which is very fascinating. So the first time that I saw this card, this is the sheep and it's the Eight of Cups. I didn't necessarily focus on the title of the card, so the sheep, and I just looked at the card itself and the image, and I thought that this was a mouth with teeth, like a monster mouth with teeth, like coming out of a hole. And I don't know whether I probably watched too many horror movies or I probably read too many horror books, because my mind went there straight away. But then I looked at the title, so, oh no, hang on a second, it's actually the eye of a sheep. So now I get it. But every time that I pull this card, I can't help it. My mind goes straight to, it looks like Alien. You know the Alien, the movie? It looks like the little head that comes out of the mouth. So it looks really creepy to me. many of these look really creepy. And again, this is the Siren and it's the devil, but at the same time, I know that the title is the Siren, but it makes me think about the merman. So as opposed to the mermaid, the merman. And if you watch The Cabin in the Woods, you will remember that because there is a merman as well. So there's, and also, I mean, seriously, can we look at the dog? This dog and the eyes of this dog. I mean, come on, this is absolutely creepy, but it's, I don't know, I love it. It's deliciously creepy. It's not something that pushes me away. It is actually something that really triggers my imagination, and it makes me want to know more. It makes me want to read with this deck, use this deck. And I have to say, I love the cardstock. It's one of those cardstock that you can hear the noise when you put the cards together like that. It is very well made. It comes with, I believe, a electronic or like a PDF guidebook. It does not have a guidebook in the box itself, but it's even the guidebook. I had printed it out, and it's very, very interesting as well. Even the mask for the Six of Pentacles, for example, you cannot say that it doesn't remind you of another horror trope, the person that hides behind the mask. I'm thinking the Phantom of the Opera and so many others that, are very famous and beloved as well. So the vampire as well, of course. The Ring, which is, of course, if you're a horror aficionado, you cannot not think about the franchise, the Japanese franchise of The Ring, movies and books as well. So really, really like this deck, and it's my favorite pick. And look at this goat card with the Five of Wands. Really scary, very creepy. It's my pick for a deck with darker colors. And the last prompt is your favorite Summerween deck. And I had to go with something that I talked about before. So this is the Dylan Dog deck, Dylan Dog Tarot. So this was published by Los Carabeo back in the 90s. I think it was published in 1991. I have gone above and beyond in order to get a hold of this deck. I was very lucky because I found a mint condition copy that was still sold by a bookstore in Milano, in Italy. And I was in Italy when I found it, so I had it shipped over, and I was really stoked. So it was published in 1991. So can you imagine? In 2007, I believe, they republished, Los Carabeo republished this deck, but because this is majors only, they actually republished the deck and they expanded it into a whole 78 cards tarot deck. They kept the major arcanas, and then they obviously expanded the other cards. I have that deck as well, but this one is actually my favorite because it does have sentences, messages at the bottom of the cards, whereas the newer version doesn't. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it does remind me so much, as I was saying before, of this protagonist, Dylan Dog. So he's pretty much, the Dean Winchester or the Sam Winchester of your Supernatural TV show, except that this is based in London, and he's obviously, he's kind of combining the same kind of scary stuff with the humorous and whimsical stuff that happens in the TV show Supernatural, because many of these stories, for example, are very dramatic. They're very, very scary. There's a lot of slasher, there's a lot of creature feature, there's a lot of haunted house tropes as well. There's a lot of also possessed people, that kind of tropes. And there's let's say there's a lot of metaphysical as well, which I always find fascinating. But the thing is that because there's always a moment in which you cannot take the horror theme over and over again, and you need a break every now and then. It's just for the tension to fade a little bit in order to get to the grand finale. And obviously they do that with a bit, throwing in a bit of humor. And so in this case, in the stories of Dylan Dog, his assistant is called Groucho, and it's this one here, and he's incredibly funny. So it's just the chuckle that it's almost a relief to utter that chuckle because you've been so scared up to that point, and then Groucho comes up with a really stupid daddy kind of joke, but it's so stupid and lame that it makes you laugh anyway because you feel like you need to take a breather, and it works perfectly. It's actually really perfect timing every time, and I really love that. Each and every one of those issues. And as I said, they started publishing this comic book or graphic novel back in 1987. And they're still going, and we're 2024, so one issue per month. So you can calculate how many there are. And there's also special editions as well. So there's a lot of issues of Dylan Dog. When you go to Italy, you can just go to a newsagent and ask for the latest edition, and it will be there waiting for you. Obviously, unfortunately, it's just in Italian, so you will need to learn Italian, or you can probably use Google Translate nowadays. It's just as easy. But it's those kind of vibes that I absolutely adore, and those are the vibes that really make going to a horror movie a very engaging experience, because you know you're gonna be scared. You always take up on the challenge of being scared and see whether you can actually resist closing your eyes. But at the same time, you want to enjoy it as well. And that is absolutely wonderful. And those themes are in these graphic novels as well. So this is my pick for my favorite. This is by far my favorite Summerween deck. But as I said, this is a challenge. So I would love if you guys want to pick it up and do a VR. Don't forget to tag me, because I always like watching videos on YouTube. But for now, have a great day.